The air in Savannah hangs thick and sweet, heavy with the scent of magnolia blossoms and the promise of rain. It's a city that breathes history, where every cobblestone street and every curtain of Spanish moss tells a story. For the past year, I felt like my own story was finally being written. Its pages filled with a kind of happiness I'd only ever read about in books. My name is Alara Hayes, and tomorrow, I was supposed to marry the love of my life. Our little house, a charming clapboard rental on the edge of the historic district, was a chaotic symphony of wedding preparations. Towel and ribbon spilled over chairs, and lists stuck to every available surface with tiny magnets. It was a happy mess, a physical manifestation of the joyful life Liam and I were building. Liam Walker. Even his name felt steady and kind. Like the man himself, he was the high school's beloved sports coach, a man whose easy smile and genuine warmth could calm the most unruly teenager and charm the most skeptical parent. To me, he was simply home. He found me that afternoon in the living room, staring at a box of champagne flutes as if they held the secrets to the universe. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. His familiar scent, a mix of fresh-cut grass from the football field and clean soap, was my favorite smell in the world. A penny for your thoughts, future Mrs. Walker, he murmured into my hair. I leaned back against his chest, a soft sigh escaping my lips. I'm just happy. It almost feels unreal, like I'm going to wake up. He squeezed me gently. This is real. Alara, you and me. Tomorrow. He turned me around to face him, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. Forever. I had been an orphan for as long as I could remember, raised by my kind but practical Aunt Margaret. She gave me a roof over my head, food on the table, and a solid education. I was grateful for all of it, but deep in my heart, there was always a quiet, aching void, a longing for the warmth of a real family, the kind I saw in old photographs and holiday movies. I wanted parents, siblings, a noisy dinner table. When I met Liam, and then his world, I thought I had finally found it. His world included Cynthia Miller. Cynthia wasn't his mother, or even a relative. She was something far more important in our small town's social fabric. She was the mother of my best friend, Chloe, and the woman who had taken me under her wing since my own mother passed away. She had a grace and elegance that seemed almost out of place in our sleepy town. While Aunt Margaret taught me how to be strong and independent, Cynthia taught me which fork to use, how to arrange flowers, and how to carry myself with confidence. She had become the mother figure I never had, and she was the unofficial planner of our wedding. She'd insisted, waving away my protests with a perfectly manicured hand. Nonsense. Sweetheart, she'd said, her voice like warm honey. It's the least I can do for my two favorite people. Seeing you this happy is my greatest joy. How could I say no to that? She dove into the preparations with a passion that rivaled my own. She found the perfect garden venue, negotiated with the caterer, and spent an entire afternoon with me at the bridal boutique, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief when I found the dress. Oh, Alara, she had whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You look like an angel, a true angel. Liam is the luckiest man in the world. I believed her. I believed every word. I saw her love for me as a precious gift, a sign that the universe was finally making up for the loneliness of my childhood. I was not just gaining a husband. I was solidifying my place in a family. Cynthia, Chloe, Liam, we were a perfect little constellation. My Aunt Margaret, however, saw things differently. She lived just a few towns over, and she'd come to help me with the final dress fitting a week ago. She sat quietly in the corner of the bridal shop, her hands clasped over her purse, her expression unreadable as Cynthia fussed over the lace on my veil. It's just a little crooked, dear, Cynthia said, her fingers deftly adjusting the delicate fabric. There. Perfection. She beamed at my reflection in the mirror, then at me. Later, as Aunt Margaret and I sat having tea, she looked at me over the rim of her floral print cup. She's very involved, isn't she? I smiled, mistaking her caution for simple observation. She's been amazing. I couldn't have done any of this without her. She's like a second mother to me. You already have a mother. Alara, she's watching over you? Aunt Margaret said gently. I want you to be careful. People aren't always what they seem. What's that supposed to mean? I asked, a little defensively. You don't like Cynthia? I think Cynthia likes being in control, she said, choosing her words carefully. And I think you and Liam should be making these decisions together. It's your wedding. Not hers. I dismissed her concerns as the overprotectiveness of a woman who had spent her life shielding me from harm. She couldn't see what I saw. A woman who loved me like a daughter, who was simply overflowing with excitement for my future. She's just helping. Aunt Margaret. She loves us. I insisted. My aunt didn't argue. She just took a slow sip of her tea, and her silence was more unsettling than any argument could have been. Now, standing in Liam's arms, the memory of that conversation felt distant and foolish. How could anyone doubt the beautiful life we were creating? What are you thinking about now? Liam asked, tilting my chin up with his finger. Aunt Margaret. I admitted. She's worried Cynthia is doing too much. Liam laughed. A warm, easy sound. Your aunt worries about everything. That's her job. Cynthia's a saint. Elara. You know that. She adores you. She's just excited to finally have a wedding to plan that isn't for one of her own. Chloe, his best friend and Cynthia's daughter, had been in a long-term relationship for years with no signs of marriage. I know. I said. My guilt evaporating. He was right. Cynthia's energy came from a place of love. It had to. She's been a rock. They both have. Liam agreed. He kissed my forehead. Now, I have to run. Final meeting with the groomsmen to make sure no one forgets their rings or their pants. I'll see you tonight at the rehearsal dinner. Don't be late. I called after him as he headed for the door. Never. He said with a wink. And then he was gone. I spent the next few hours in a blissful daze, ticking off the final items on my checklist. Call the florist to confirm delivery time. Pack the overnight bag for the hotel. Write a thank you note for the baker. Each mundane task felt sacred. A little ritual leading me closer to the altar. My best friend, Chloe, called me in the late afternoon. Her voice was bubbly with excitement. Are you freaking out yet? She squealed into the phone. Strangely calm. I replied, laughing. I think your mom has planned everything so perfectly that there's nothing left to worry about. I know, right? She's been in her element. I've never seen her so happy. She really does love you like a daughter. You know. I know. I said, my heart swelling with gratitude. I love her too. I'm so lucky to have you both. We're the lucky ones. Chloe said sincerely. You make our town, and Liam, a better place. Now, get some rest. Tonight is the rehearsal, and tomorrow is the main event. You need your beauty sleep. Mrs. Walker to be. We hung up, and I wandered into the bedroom that Liam and I had so carefully decorated together. The walls were a soft sage green, the color of new beginnings. Our bed, with its simple wooden frame and crisp white duvet, looked so inviting. This was the bed where we would wake up as husband and wife. On my side of the bed, on the nightstand, was a framed photo of my parents. It was one of the few I had. A black and white picture from their wedding day. They were so young, so full of hope. My mother's smile was radiant. She was holding a single gardenia, her favorite flower. A sudden thought struck me. My something old. It was a small, silver locket my mother had worn on her wedding day. Aunt Margaret had given it to me when I got engaged. And in the flurry of the last few weeks, I had completely forgotten where I'd put it for safekeeping. I remembered tucking it into the jewelry box on my dresser, but it wasn't there. I searched my drawers, my closet, the bathroom cabinet. My calm began to fray at the edges, replaced by a rising tide of panic. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was my only tangible connection to my mother on the most important day of my life. I couldn't walk down the aisle without it. I tried to think. Where could it be? I remembered packing away some sentimental items a few months ago to make space. Maybe I had put it in one of the boxes in the attic? It seemed unlikely. But I had to check. I pulled down the folding ladder and climbed into the dusty, dimly lit space. The air was still and smelled of old wood and forgotten memories. Boxes were stacked against one wall, labeled in my neat handwriting, college textbooks, winter clothes, photos. I shifted them around. My dress for the rehearsal dinner getting smudged with dust. And then I saw it. A small, unlabeled showbox tucked behind a larger one. My heart lifted. I pulled it down, sat on the dusty floorboards, and opened it. Inside was not the locket. Instead, there was a bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. They weren't mine. The handwriting on the envelopes was a familiar, elegant script, Cynthia's. But the letters weren't addressed to me, or to her husband, or even to Chloe. They were addressed to Liam. My breath caught in my throat. It didn't make sense. Why would Liam's letters from Cynthia be in a box in my attic? Maybe they were from years ago. Motherly notes of encouragement from when he was in college. Yes, that had to be it. Curiosity warred with my sense of privacy. It felt wrong to read them, but an unidentifiable dread was coiling in my stomach. My fingers trembled as I untied the ribbon. The postmarks were not from years ago. The most recent one was from last month. I pulled out the top letter, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I unfolded the thick, cream-colored paper and began to read. The words blurred at first. They were intimate, passionate, filled with a language that had no place in the relationship I thought they had. This wasn't the letter of a mother figure to a beloved son-in-law-to-be. This was a love letter. A letter from a lover. My dearest Liam. It began. Counting the hours until I could feel your arms around me again. These stolen moments are all that keep me sane. Pretending in front of her is becoming more difficult with each passing day. The way she looks at you with those wide, innocent eyes, it's almost pathetic. But not long now. Soon. This ridiculous charade will be over. And you will be mine. Bound by law if not by love. Just get through the ceremony. Endure her touch. And then you can come home. To me. The world tilted on its axis. The air in the attic suddenly felt thin. Unbreathable. I couldn't be reading this correctly. It had to be a joke. A horrible, cruel misunderstanding. I frantically grabbed another letter. And then another. They were all the same. Filled with secret meetings, shared frustrations, and passionate declarations of love. They spoke of a long-running affair, one that had been happening right under my nose. They detailed their contempt for my naivety, my trusting nature. They called me the girl, the solution, the convenience, my entire reality. The beautiful, happy life I thought I was building was a lie, a carefully constructed stage play. And I was the fool, the lead actress who didn't even know her part. Liam didn't love me. He was using me. And Cynthia, the woman I loved and trusted like a mother, she was not my champion. She was my puppeteer. A sound from downstairs broke the suffocating silence. The front door opening and closing. Alara. It was Liam's voice, calling my name. I forgot my cufflinks. Are you here? I sat frozen on the attic floor, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, the proof of their betrayal in my hands, the love letters of my fiancé and the woman I called my second mother. Tomorrow was my wedding day, and my world had just ended. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. His voice, the same voice that had just whispered promises of forever in my ear, was now a threat. Each footstep he took on the floorboards below was a hammer blow against my fragile composure. I was trapped in the dusty attic of my own home, holding the evidence that my entire life was a lie. Alara, you up here? He called again. His voice closer now. At the bottom of the attic ladder. Panic seized me. My mind raced, scrambling for a plausible explanation. I couldn't let him see the letters. I couldn't let him see the devastation on my face. With trembling hands, I shoved the letters back into the showbox, slid the lid on, and pushed it deep behind the other boxes, into the darkness where it belonged. My movements were frantic, clumsy. A cloud of dust billowed around me, making me cough. Yeah, I'm here. I called down, my voice sounding unnaturally high and strained. I coughed again, trying to cover the tremor in my voice, just looking for something. You okay? You sound weird. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing myself to function. I had to go down there. I had to face him. I wiped the dust from my hands onto my pants and wiped the tears from my eyes with the back of my hand, hoping the dim light would hide the redness. Just dusty up here. I managed to say, I'm coming down. Each step down the rickety ladder was a monumental effort of will. I felt like I was descending into a different world. A colder, harsher one than the one I had inhabited just 10 minutes ago. When my feet touched the floor of the hallway, he was standing there, looking up at me with an expression of mild concern. He was wearing a fresh shirt, ready for the rehearsal dinner. The sight of him, so normal and handsome, sent a wave of nausea through me. What in the world were you doing up there? He asked, a small smile playing on his lips. You're covered in dust. Sweetheart. He reached out to brush a cobweb from my hair, and I flinched, taking a small step back. His smile faltered. Hey, everything all right? I forced a laugh, a dry, scratchy sound. Sorry, you just startled me. I was looking for my mother's locket. My something old. I couldn't find it anywhere. and I suddenly remembered packing some old jewelry away. I thought it might be up there. The lie came surprisingly easy, probably because it was born from a now irrelevant truth. His expression softened with understanding. Oh, honey. Of course. Did you find it? I shook my head, unable to speak. The lump in my throat was too large. The locket didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered. We'll find it, he said, his voice full of the false reassurance that I now recognized as his default setting. He stepped forward again, and this time I didn't back away. I couldn't. I had to play the part. He wrapped his arms around me in a hug. It felt like being embraced by a stranger. His body was warm, solid, and utterly alien. I stood stiffly in his arms, my own hands clenched into fists at my sides. All I could think about were the words on the paper. Endure her touch. You're trembling, he murmured against my temple. Don't stress about the locket. It's just a thing. Alara, the only thing that matters is you and me. Okay. I nodded against his chest, my face hidden from his view. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. He was comforting me over a lost symbol of love, while he himself was the thief of the real thing. I pulled away, needing to put space between us before I suffocated. You're right, I said, my voice a dull monotone. I should get ready for the dinner. I'll look for it later. That's my girl. He beamed at me, completely oblivious. It was worse than malice. It was indifference. To him, I was a part of the scenery, a role to be managed. I found the cufflinks. I'll see you at the restaurant. Don't be late. He gave me a quick peck on the cheek. It felt cold and wet. Then, just as he had before, he turned and walked out the door, whistling softly. The moment the door clicked shut, my legs gave out. I slid down the wall to the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees. A single, dry sob escaped my lips, but the tears wouldn't come. It was a grief too deep for tears, a shock that had frozen my very soul. The beautiful house felt like a tomb. Every object, photos on the wall, the throw blanket we bought together, the ridiculous love sign Chloe had given us as a housewarming gift was a monument to a lie. How long had it been going on? The letters went back almost a year of secret meetings, of shared looks I was too blind to see, of laughter behind my back. Cynthia, the woman who helped me pick out my wedding dress, the woman who held my hand and told me I was the daughter she'd always wanted. Had she been sleeping with him then? Was she laughing at me as I stood in front of the mirror, blissfully unaware, dreaming of a future she was actively plotting to destroy? A hot, bitter anger began to burn through the ice in my veins. They thought I was pathetic, a sweet, simple girl with wide, innocent eyes. They underestimated me. They had counted on my love, my trust, my naivety, and that was going to be their biggest mistake. But what could I do? Call off the wedding? Stand up in front of our friends and family and announce that my fiancé was sleeping with my best friend's mother? The humiliation would be unbearable. The scandal would shatter our small, quiet town. It would destroy Chloe, who loved her mother and Liam without question. The thought of her pain was a physical blow. She was innocent in all of this. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked loudly, counting down the seconds to the rehearsal dinner, to the wedding, to the moment my fake life would become a legally binding reality. Then, a sliver of doubt, a desperate, pathetic last gasp of hope, entered my mind. What if I misunderstood? What if the letters were some kind of fantasy? A twisted game? It was insane. But my heart grasped at the illogical straw. I hadn't seen them. I had only read words on a page. I needed to see it. I needed to know, for sure, that it was real. I needed to look the monster in the face before I could decide how to kill it. I stood up, my body moving with a new, chilling sense of purpose. I walked into the bathroom and stared at my reflection. My face was pale, my eyes wide and haunted. The happy bride was gone. In her place was a stranger, a woman on the edge of a cliff. I turned on the shower, the hot water a welcome shock to my numb skin. As I washed away the attic dust, I washed away the old Alara, the trusting girl, the romantic. She died in that shower. I got dressed for the dinner. I put on the silk floral dress Chloe had helped me pick out. I did my makeup with a steady hand, covering the dark circles that had already begun to form under my eyes. I applied a bright red lipstick, a color of defiance. When I was done, I looked like Alara Hayes, the happy bride-to-be. It was the performance of a lifetime. But I didn't go to the restaurant. Instead, I got in my car and drove back to our little house. A single light was on in the bedroom window. My heart hammered against my ribs. I parked down the street, hidden by the deep shadows of an old oak tree. And I waited. My phone buzzed in my purse. A text from Liam. Running a little late. Save me a seat. Another from Chloe. Where are you? Mom is saving your plate. The lies. So many effortless lies. About 20 minutes later, a familiar silver sedan pulled up in front of the house. Cynthia got out. She was dressed elegantly for the dinner, but she moved with a hurried, secret energy. She didn't even glance around before letting herself in with a key I didn't know she had. My last shred of hope withered and died. But I still needed to hear it. I needed the final nail in the coffin of my dead dreams. I got out of my car, my shoes silent on the grass verge. The air was cool now, the earlier promise of rain finally arriving in a soft, misty drizzle. I crept around the side of the house, to the window of our bedroom. The curtains weren't drawn all the way. A small gap remained. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the windowsill to steady myself. I peered through the gap, and the world fell away. They were in there. Liam had shed his jacket and tie. Cynthia was in his arms, her hands tangled in his hair, kissing him with a desperate, hungry passion that I had never seen from him, a passion he had never shown me. I pulled back, pressing my hand to my mouth to stifle a gasp. I leaned against the cold, damp clapboard of the house. My eyes squeezed shut, but I couldn't block out the sound of their voices, muffled but clear through the thin glass. We can't stay long, Cynthia's voice said, laced with a breathless urgency. People will notice we're both missing. Let them. Liam's voice replied, thick with desire. I just needed to see you. Actually see you. Today was hard. All her talk about forever. I know. My love. I know. Her voice was soothing. Proprietary. But you were perfect. Just a little longer. Get through tomorrow. Smile for the pictures. Say the vows. Once you're married, everything gets easier. She'll be so busy playing house she won't notice a thing. She's a sweet girl. But she's simple. She believes in fairy tales. A low laugh from Liam. She does. We'll be careful. Cynthia continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. A business trip for you. A spa weekend for me. No one will ever suspect. We just have to endure this one last day of playing happy family. Then our lives can truly begin. Endure. There was that word again. My wedding day, the happiest day of my life, was something for them to endure. I was a chapter they needed to get through, a hurdle to overcome. Before the real story could start, I couldn't hear anymore. I couldn't see anymore. I pushed myself away from the house, stumbling backward into the shadows. I ran back to my car, my red lipstick smeared, the misty rain soaking my hair and my pretty silk dress. I fumbled with the keys, my hands refusing to obey. Finally, I got the door open and collapsed into the driver's seat. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there in the crushing darkness, the sound of their betrayal echoing in the silent car. The tears came then, hot and silent, tracing paws down my carefully made-up face. My heart wasn't breaking. It was gone. It had been carved out of my chest, leaving a hollow, echoing cavern of pain. Tomorrow, I was supposed to walk down the aisle in a white dress, toward a man who was waiting to start his real life with another woman. The woman who was supposed to be standing in the front row, weeping with joy for me. The fairy tale was a horror story, and I was the only one who knew it. The drive to Aunt Margaret's house was a blur. Rain began to fall in earnest. Thick, southern drops that smeared the world outside my windshield into a watercolor of bleeding lights. I drove on autopilot, my mind a raging storm that mirrored the one outside. The hollow cavern in my chest was beginning to fill with something hot and sharp. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was rage. A pure, cold fury that burned away the tears and clarified my thoughts. They had made a fool of me. They had used my love and my trust as weapons against me. They thought I was simple. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Aunt Margaret lived in a small, sturdy brick house 30 minutes out of town. Surrounded by a garden she fiercely protected from deer and pests. When I pulled into her driveway, the headlights cut through the rain, illuminating her standing on the porch, a silhouette of concern wrapped in a thick cardigan. She must have seen my car. The moment I stepped out, she knew. She didn't have to ask. She just opened her arms, and I fell into them. The carefully constructed dam inside me finally breaking. The sobs that came were ragged and ugly, torn from the deepest part of my soul. She held me, her small frame surprisingly strong, and guided me into the warmth of her home. She sat me down on her worn floral sofa, wrapped me in a heavy afghan, and pressed a mug of hot, sweet tea into my trembling hands. She didn't speak, just sat in the armchair opposite me, her gaze steady and patient, giving me the space to let the first wave of pain wash over me. The house smelled of cinnamon and old books, a scent of safety and sanity in a world that had just gone mad. "It's Liam." I finally choked out, the words tasting like poison. "And Cynthia." Aunt Margaret's expression hardened, but there was no surprise in her eyes, only a deep, sad confirmation. "I knew it," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I knew there was something wrong with that woman." "What did you find out?" Through hiccuping breaths, I told her everything. The letters in the attic, the conversation I overheard outside the window, the words they used. Pathetic, simple, endure. With each confession, a piece of the burden lifted, transferred into the safe, sensible hands of the woman who had raised me. She listened without interruption, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. When I finished, the story hung in the air between us, monstrous and unbelievable. "I have to call it off," I whispered, staring into my mug. "I have to cancel the wedding." "No," Aunt Margaret said instantly. Her voice was so sharp it made me look up. "What? What do you mean?" "No. I can't marry him. I can't stand up there next to him, knowing what I know." "Of course you can't marry him. You foolish girl," she said, her tone softening slightly. "But canceling it now? Tonight? That's what they expect you to do if you ever found out. You'll run away crying. They'll spin some story about bridal nerves. And in a few months, they'll be together. And everyone will say how they were there for each other during a difficult time. You'll be the unstable one. They'll make you the villain of their love story." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow because I knew they were true. Cynthia was a master of appearances. She would paint me as a hysterical, unreliable girl who cracked under the pressure. She would comfort Liam publicly, her hand on his arm, her eyes full of feigned sympathy. They would win. They would get everything they wanted, and I would be left with nothing but humiliation. "So what do I do?" My voice was a raw whisper. "What can I possibly do?" Aunt Margaret leaned forward, her eyes, usually so gentle, now glinting like steel. "You do nothing," she said. "You go through with it. You put on the dress. You walk down that aisle. And you let everyone see the happy, beautiful bride. You let them stand there, in front of God and everyone they know. And you let them get comfortable in their lies. And then?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound with a terrifying new rhythm. A small, grim smile touched her lips. "And then, when it's your turn to say I do, you tell the truth. You turn their wedding into their trial, and you make sure there are no survivors." The plan was audacious. It was terrifying. It was cruel. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. The idea took root in the barren soil of my heart and began to grow. It wasn't just about stopping the wedding anymore. It was about justice. It was about taking back the narrative. They had written me as a fool in their secret play. I would rewrite the ending. Live on stage, with them as the unwilling stars. The rest of the night was a strange mix of grief and plotting. We sat at her kitchen table, a yellow legal pad between us. Aunt Margaret, the pragmatic general, mapped out the strategy. "First thing tomorrow," she said, "you need to be the perfect bride. Happy, glowing, a little nervous. Plausible deniability is everything." "Chloe," I said suddenly, the name a fresh stab of pain. "What about Chloe? This will destroy her." Aunt Margaret's face softened. "I know, child. That's the hardest part. She's a casualty in a war she didn't know was happening. But the truth would destroy her more if it came out later, in whispers and rumors. This will be a clean break. A terrible, painful one, but clean. She will see her mother for who she truly is, all at once. It's a mercy, in a twisted sort of way." I wasn't sure I agreed, but I knew she was right. Shielding Chloe from this would mean letting Cynthia and Liam get away with it, and I couldn't do that. Not anymore. We talked until the storm outside passed and the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the kitchen window. The day of my wedding, I was exhausted, my eyes swollen and raw, but I felt a strange sense of clarity. The path ahead was terrifying, but it was a path. It was action, not despair. Aunt Margaret drove me back to my empty house. She came inside with me. Her presence a silent, solid support. "Go get ready," she said. "I'll handle the phones." My phone had been buzzing nonstop. Dozens of missed calls and texts from Liam, Chloe, and Cynthia. "Where are you? Are you okay?" We were so worried. The lies were relentless. Aunt Margaret picked up the phone and texted them from my number. "So sorry. Had a terrible migraine and drove to my aunt's. Didn't want to worry anyone. Feeling better now. See you at the church." So excited. Zuxo. The cheerful, bubbly tone was nauseating. It was perfect. I moved through the morning like a ghost. I showered. I ate the toast Aunt Margaret made me. I sat in a chair while the makeup artist, a cheerful woman named Donna, chattered on about the weather and how radiant I looked. "You're the calmest bride I've ever seen," Donna said, dusting my face with powder. "Most of them are a bundle of nerves. I'm just ready," I said, looking at my reflection. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. Her skin was flawless. Her eyes were bright thanks to a liberal application of eye drops, and her lips were painted a soft, bridal pink. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were old. They knew things. Then Chloe arrived with the bridesmaids. She rushed to my side, her face a mask of concern. "Oh my God. Elara. We were so scared. Why didn't you call?" "I'm so sorry," I said, forcing my voice to sound contrite. I hugged her, and for a moment, the feel of my best friend's arms around me nearly broke my resolve. The guilt was a physical weight. My head was just pounding. I didn't want to ruin the dinner for everyone. I just needed my aunt. "As long as you're okay," she said, her relief genuine. She looked at me, her eyes shining. "You look breathtaking. Absolutely breathtaking." Behind her, Cynthia appeared in the doorway of the bedroom. She was dressed in a dove gray dress, the picture of maternal elegance. Our eyes met. Her face was a perfect blend of concern and loving relief. "Oh, my dear girl," she said, walking toward me. "You gave us all quite a scare." She placed her cool hands on my arms. "But you're here now, and you look perfect." I looked right into her eyes. The eyes of the woman who had written those vile letters, who had lain with my fiancé in my bed. I gave her the sweetest, brightest smile I could muster. "Thank you, Cynthia," I said, my voice dripping with false sincerity. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." For a split second, I saw something flicker in her eyes, a flash of unease. Or maybe it was just my imagination. But then it was gone, replaced by her usual warm, confident smile. She believed she was safe. She believed her secret was hidden. The next hour was a surreal performance. We took pictures. We drank champagne. I laughed at jokes. I admired the bridesmaids' dresses. I played the part of the happy, excited bride so convincingly that I almost believed it myself. With every passing minute, my resolve hardened. Every fake smile from Cynthia, every concerned glance from Liam via text, was another stone in the foundation of my fury. It was finally time. We rode to the church in a white limousine. As we pulled up to the old stone steps, I could hear the organ music swelling from inside. This was it. The stage was set. The audience was waiting. Chloe squeezed my hand as we prepared to walk down the aisle. "Ready?" she whispered. I looked at my best friend, my heart aching for the pain I was about to cause her. I gave her a real smile then. A sad, genuine one. "I'm ready," I said. The heavy church doors swung open. Every head turned. At the end of the aisle, bathed in the light of the stained glass windows, stood Liam. He was smiling, his handsome face filled with what looked, to the rest of the world, like love and adoration. He looked like the dream I had once believed in. But I knew what was behind that smile. I saw the lie in his eyes. I took my first step down the aisle. My arm linked through my uncle's. My dress rustled softly. My veil floated around me like a shroud. I was walking not toward a new life, but toward a reckoning. And as I looked to the faces of the two people who had betrayed me, smiling at me from the front of the church, I felt no fear, only a cold, crystalline calm. The show was about to begin. The aisle felt a mile long. With every step, I could feel the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes on me. They saw a bride, a vision in white lace and silk, floating toward her future. They saw a fairy tale. I saw a battlefield. My uncle, a kind, distant relative who had agreed to give me away, patted my hand, probably mistaking my rigid posture for nerves. The organ music swelled. A grand, triumphant sound that felt like a mockery. The air in the church was thick with the cloying scent of lilies and beeswax. I focused on the man waiting for me. Liam. He stood tall and confident in his black tuxedo, a perfect white rose pinned to his lapel. As I drew closer, I could see the details of his face, his carefully styled hair, the tiny, almost invisible scar above his eyebrow from a long-ago football injury, and his eyes. They were fixed on me, shining with a practiced adoration. It was a magnificent performance. He looked like a man deeply in love. He looked like a man who had just come from the arms of another woman. I saw him mouth the words, "You're beautiful." I gave him a small, shy smile in return. The smile of the innocent girl they thought I was. The smile of the lamb being led to the slaughter. But they were wrong. I wasn't the lamb. I was the wolf. And I had come to their feast in sheep's clothing. My gaze flickered to the front pew. There she was. Cynthia. Her hands were clasped in her lap. Her posture perfect. She caught my eye and gave me a little nod, a tear glistening on her lashes. It was a portrait of proud, maternal love. The lie was so profound, so utterly seamless, that for a terrifying second, I almost doubted myself. But then I remembered the words from the letters, the sound of their voices through the window, and the ice in my veins reformed, harder than before. Beside her, Chloe was beaming, her face a picture of pure, unadulterated happiness for her best friend. The sight of her was a fresh wound, a reminder of the collateral damage this day would bring. I steeled myself. It was a necessary pain. My uncle placed my hand into Liam's. His hand was warm and slightly damp. As his fingers closed around mine, a wave of revulsion washed over me. Endure his touch. Cynthia's words echoed in my mind. I focused on that, using the disgust as fuel. I could endure this. I could endure anything for what was to come. We turned to face the priest, an elderly man with kind, watery eyes who had known Liam's family for years. He smiled benevolently at us. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice echoing in the hallowed silence of the church. "We are gathered here today in the sight of God to join this man, Liam Walker, and this woman, Elara Hayes, in holy matrimony." The traditional words washed over me. Each one was a new layer of hypocrisy. He spoke of the sanctity of marriage, of love and faithfulness, of cherishing one another in sickness and in health. I stood perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the large wooden cross behind the altar. I listened as if from a great distance, a spectator of my own wedding. My mind was a calm, quiet lake, the storm having passed, leaving behind a chilling stillness. I was no longer the main character in this drama. I was the director. I could feel Liam's thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. It was a small, possessive gesture, meant to be comforting. To the guests, it looked tender. To me, it felt like a brand. He was marking his territory, claiming his prize, the simple girl who would be his wife, his alibi. The priest continued, speaking of the trust and honesty required to build a life together. He spoke of forsaking all others, of being true and loyal for as long as they both should live. I risked a glance at Cynthia. She was watching us, her expression serene. How could she sit there, in a house of God, and listen to these words without spontaneously combusting from the sheer force of her own deceit? The audacity of it was almost impressive. Then came the vows Liam had written. He turned to face me, his hands holding both of mine. He looked deep into my eyes, and for the first time, I felt the flicker of something real in his expression. It wasn't love. It was nerves. The final moments of the con. Before the mark is sealed. "Elara," he began, his voice clear and steady. He had rehearsed this. "From the moment I met you, I knew my life was changed. You walked in with a light around you, a warmth and a kindness that I never knew I was missing. You are my best friend, my confidant, my home." My face remained a mask of rapt attention. Inside, I was dissecting every word. Light, warmth, kindness. He wasn't describing me. He was describing my utility. I was a convenient, pleasant appliance for the life he wanted to build with someone else. "I promise to love you unconditionally," he went on, his voice swelling with false emotion. "I promise to be honest with you, to support your dreams, and to always be faithful to you. I promise to build a family with you, to fill our home with laughter and joy. You are my beginning, my middle, and my end. I love you." The lie was so perfect, so complete, that a murmur of appreciation rippled through the guests. A few people sniffled audibly. I saw Chloe wipe a tear from her eye. Liam finished, his eyes shining, waiting for my emotional response. I gave it to him. I let a single, perfect tear trace the path down my cheek. I let my lips tremble just slightly. He squeezed my hands, a look of triumph on his face. He thought he had done it. He thought he had won. Now it was my turn. The priest prompted me for my vows. I had written them weeks ago, on a piece of pretty stationery, filled with heartfelt promises and dreams for our future. That piece of paper was now a crumpled ball at the bottom of my purse. I wouldn't be needing it. I took a breath and turned to Liam. I let my eyes drift over his face, as if memorizing it one last time. I let the silence stretch, just a beat too long. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. The guests shifted in their pews. I didn't speak. Instead, the priest, assuming I was overcome with emotion, decided to move on to the binding questions. He cleared his throat. Liam Walker, he said, his voice resonating through the church. Do you take this woman, Alara Hayes, to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to love and to cherish her, in sickness and in health, for richer, for poorer, forsaking all others, and to be faithful to her alone, so long as you both shall live? Liam never broke eye contact with me. His smile was dazzling. I do, he said, his voice ringing with confidence and finality. The words slammed into the silence of the church. I do. He had said it. He had lied before God. He had lied before everyone we knew. He had sealed his own fate. A perfect, beautiful calm settled over me. The final piece was in place. The trap was sprung. The priest turned to me. His kindly face was expectant. The entire church leaned forward, waiting. It was my turn. The culmination of a year of planning, a lifetime of dreams, and 24 hours of agonizing truth. It was the moment. And do you, Alara Hayes, the priest asked, his voice gentle, do you take this man, Liam Walker, to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to love and to cherish him, in sickness and in health, for richer, for poorer, forsaking all others, and to be faithful to him alone, so long as you both shall live? This was it. My cue. The beginning of the end. I looked at Liam, at his hopeful, fraudulent smile. I looked at Cynthia in the front row, her face glowing with victory. I looked at Chloe, her eyes shining with tears of joy for me. I held Liam's hands in mine. I took a slow, deliberate breath. The world seemed to stop, holding its breath with me. Every eye was on my lips, waiting for the simple words. I opened my mouth to speak, and then I closed it. I let the silence hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. Liam's smile began to twitch at the corners. The priest's kindly expression wavered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. From the corner of my eye, I saw Cynthia shift in her seat, her serene posture tightening almost imperceptibly. I turned my head slightly, my eyes leaving Liam's face and scanning the hushed crowd. I looked at the faces of our friends, our colleagues, the people who had watched our love story unfold. They were all here to witness a union. They were about to witness an execution. Finally, I brought my gaze back to Liam. I gave him a smile. It wasn't the adoring smile of a bride. It was a slow, cold smile, devoid of any warmth. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I saw the first real seed of panic take root in his gaze. He knew, in that instant, that something was terribly wrong. Before I answer that, I said, my voice not a whisper, but a clear, steady bell that rang through the silent church. It was stronger than I expected. It was the voice of the woman I had become overnight. I have a question of my own. The priest opened his mouth to object, to remind me of the sanctity of the proceedings. But I didn't give him the chance. My eyes were locked on Liam. My question is for you, Liam, I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. The vow you just took, the promise to forsake all others and be faithful to me alone, was that promise meant to start today? Or was it retroactive? A collective gasp went through the church. Liam's face went white. The color drained from it so fast he looked like a marble statue. His hands, still holding mine, turned clammy. Alara, what are you doing? He hissed, his voice a low, panicked whisper. I ignored him. I raised my voice so that everyone, even those in the back pews, could hear me clearly. Because I'm a little confused about the timeline. For instance, did that vow apply last night? When you were in our bed? The bed we were supposed to share as husband and wife tonight? Another wave of shock. More audible this time. rippled through the guests. People were turning to look at each other, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. Chloe, my dear, innocent Chloe, looked utterly bewildered, as if I had suddenly started speaking in a foreign language. But Cynthia knew. I shot a glance at her, and the mask had finally shattered. Her face was a frozen sculpture of fury and panic. Her carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble around her. Liam's grip on my hands tightened painfully. "Stop it," he gritted out through a clenched jaw, his smile now a grotesque rictus of terror. "Stop this right now." "Stop what?" "Liam," I asked, my voice laced with a sweet, dangerous innocence. "I'm just asking for clarity. Marriage is a big commitment. After all, I want to make sure we're both on the same page about what faithfulness means." I paused, letting the implication sink in. Then I delivered the killing blow. Or maybe I should be asking her. I pulled one of my hands free from his desperate grip and I pointed. My finger, steady and unwavering, aimed directly at the front pew, directly at Cynthia Miller. "Why don't we ask her?" I said, my voice dropping into a tone of chilling intimacy. "Cynthia, you've been like a mother to me. You've given me so much advice about love and marriage. Perhaps you can enlighten us. When a man promises to forsake all others, does that include his fiancée's best friend's mother?" The church erupted, not in shouts, but in a maelstrom of frantic whispers, of rustling clothes as everyone turned to stare at the accused. Cynthia looked as if she had been turned to stone. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it was almost gratifying to watch. Chloe was staring at her mother, her mouth hanging open, her mind frantically trying to process the impossible accusation I had just made. "Alara, for God's sake." Liam was frantic now, his voice cracking. He tried to pull me toward him, to silence me, but I stood my ground. "Don't touch me," I said, my voice low and venomous. I pulled my other hand free and took a step back, creating a chasm between us at the altar. "You've touched me for the last time." I turned back to the stunned audience. My story, my truth, poured out of me. "I'm sorry to ruin this beautiful day for all of you. I truly am. I know you all came here to celebrate a marriage, but there will be no wedding today, because the marriage you came to celebrate is a lie. This man," I said, gesturing to Liam, who now looked like a cornered animal, "and that woman," I pointed again at Cynthia, "have been having an affair for the better part of a year, right under my nose, right under the nose of her own daughter." At the mention of her name, Chloe let out a small, wounded sound, like a cry. She looked from my face to Liam's, to her mother's. The truth, the horrible, undeniable truth, was finally dawning in her eyes. It was the most painful thing I had ever witnessed. "They thought I was simple," I continued, my voice ringing with a righteous fury I didn't know I possessed. "They thought I was a fool who would be so grateful for a husband and a family, that I wouldn't see what was happening right in front of me. They planned to marry me, to let me play the happy wife, while they carried on their disgusting secret. My wedding day wasn't meant to be the start of my new life. It was meant to be the start of theirs." The whispers had stopped. The church was held in a dead, suffocating silence, broken only by Chloe's soft, heartbroken sobs. Everyone was staring, transfixed by the horror movie that had replaced the wedding. I had one more thing to do. I reached up and slowly, deliberately, unpinned my veil. The delicate lace floated from my hair. I held it in my hands for a moment. It was a symbol of a dream that was now dead. I let it drop to the cold stone floor at my feet. Then I looked at Liam. The last traces of fight had gone out of him. He just stood there, exposed and defeated, his perfect tuxedo now looking like a cheap costume. "So, to answer your question, Father," I said, turning to the priest, who looked utterly shell-shocked. "No, I do not take this man. I do not promise to love, cherish, or obey him. I don't, and I never will." I turned my back on Liam. I turned my back on the altar, on the flowers, on the entire charade. I faced the crowd, my head held high. I met the shocked and pitying gazes of our guests without shame. I was not the victim here. Not anymore. I started walking. Not running. Walking. My steps were measured and calm as I proceeded back down the aisle. The same path I had walked just minutes before as a hopeful bride. Now I walked it as a free woman. People leaned away from me as if I were on fire. The sea of guests parted before me. I didn't look at Chloe as I passed her pew. I couldn't. The sound of her weeping was a knife in my heart. but it was a wound that would have to be tended to later. As I passed Cynthia, our eyes met for a final, fleeting moment. I saw no remorse in her eyes, only a cold, bottomless hatred. The hatred of a predator whose prey had not only escaped, but had turned and ripped out its throat. I reached the heavy church doors. I didn't look back. I pushed them open and stepped out into the bright, clean afternoon light. The rain had passed. The sun was shining. It felt like the first day of the rest of my life. The moment I stepped outside, the sounds from within the church were muffled by the heavy oak doors swinging shut behind me. It was like closing the cover of a terrible book. The world outside was shockingly normal. The sun was warm on my skin. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient live oaks, and a group of tourists across the square laughed, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. For a moment, I just stood there on the top step, breathing. The air tasted clean, free of the cloying scent of lilies and lies. Then the doors burst open again. It wasn't Liam. It wasn't Cynthia. It was Aunt Margaret. Her face was grim, but her eyes were shining with a fierce, triumphant pride. She had my purse and my car keys in her hand. She had followed the plan perfectly. "The car is around the corner," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Let's go, before the jackals come out." She took my arm, and her solid presence was the anchor I needed. We didn't run. We walked with a determined stride down the stone steps and along the brick sidewalk. I was still in my wedding dress. People on the street were staring. A young couple pointed, smiling, assuming they were seeing a happy bride on her way to a reception. The irony was a bitter pill. We rounded the corner to where she had parked her sensible sedan. As I reached for the door handle, a voice cried out my name. "Elara!" My heart seized. It was Chloe. I turned, and she was running toward me, her bridesmaid dress askew, her face blotchy and ravaged by tears. She stumbled to a halt a few feet away from me, her chest heaving. "Is it true?" she choked out, her voice raw with disbelief and pain. "Everything you said. Is it true?" I looked at my best friend, the girl I had shared every secret with since we were 5 years old, and my carefully constructed armor cracked. This was the true cost of my rebellion. Her pain. "Yes, Chloe," I said softly, my own voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry. I saw them. I heard them." She shook her head. A violent, denying motion. "No, not my mom. She loves you." She wouldn't, and Liam, her voice broke, unable to finish the sentence. She was trapped in the wreckage, trying to make sense of a world that no longer had a foundation. "I didn't want you to find out this way," I said, taking a hesitant step toward her. "I never wanted to hurt you." "You didn't want to hurt me?" she cried, her voice rising with a hysterical edge. "You stood up in front of the entire town and destroyed my family. You humiliated my mother. You did this to me." Her words were a punch to the gut. I had expected her to be hurt, confused, but I wasn't prepared for her anger to be directed at me. She was defending them. Her mind, unable to accept the monstrous truth about her mother, had defaulted to seeing me as the attacker. "Chloe, she lied to you, too," I pleaded gently. "She and Liam, they used both of us." "Liar," she shrieked, tears streaming down her face. "You're a liar. You were probably just jealous of my mom's relationship with Liam. You couldn't stand that he looked up to her. You made this all up to ruin everything." Aunt Margaret stepped forward. "That's enough, Chloe," she said, her voice stern. "You're in shock. You're not thinking clearly. Stay out of this." Chloe sobbed, pointing a trembling finger at my aunt. "You probably helped her cook up this whole insane story." The accusation was so wild, so far from the truth, that it stunned me into silence. I realized then that there was nothing I could say. The truth I had revealed was too big, too world-shattering for her to accept all at once. It was easier to believe I was a monster than to believe her mother was one. "I'm sorry, Chloe," I whispered. It was all I could say. I got into the car. Aunt Margaret slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked back through the rear window. Chloe was standing alone on the sidewalk, weeping, the perfect picture of a bridesmaid at a wedding that had turned into a funeral. Behind her, in the distance, the church doors opened again, and a chaotic flood of guests began to spill out, their faces a sea of confusion and shock. The drive away from the church was silent. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window and watched my town, my life, recede behind me. Every street corner, every shop front, held a memory that was now tainted. The cafe where Liam and I had our first date. The park where he proposed. The bookstore where Chloe and I used to spend hours. It was all part of a story that wasn't real. Where are we going? I asked. My voice flat. My house first. Aunt Margaret replied. Her eyes on the road. You're not going back to that house. We'll get you some clothes. And then we're leaving. Leaving? You can't stay here. Alara. Not for a while. This town is going to be a war zone of gossip and accusations. You need to go somewhere you can breathe. Somewhere you can heal. She was right. The thought of facing the whispers, the pitying looks, the inevitable confrontations, was exhausting. I had won the battle, but I had no energy left for the war. When we got to her house, the silence was a welcome relief. I walked into the guest room, the same room I had stayed in countless times as a child. I unzipped the absurdly expensive wedding dress, the price of which now seemed like a cosmic joke. I let it pull on the floor, a heap of white silk and broken dreams. I stepped out of it and left it there. I put on a pair of old jeans and a soft, worn sweater that belonged to my aunt. I felt more like myself in those simple clothes than I had in a year. While Aunt Margaret packed a bag for me, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally looked at my phone. It had exploded. Hundreds of messages, missed calls, voicemail notifications. Most were from a chaotic jumble of friends, asking what had happened, if I was okay. Some were angry texts from Liam's relatives, and then there were the ones from the main players. From Liam, a frantic series of texts that devolved from angry accusations to desperate pleading. How could you do that to me? To us? You've ruined my life. Alara. Please. We can talk about this. It was a mistake. I love you. Please call me. I'm so sorry. I deleted the messages without a flicker of emotion. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. And then there was one single text message from Cynthia. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't an apology. It was a declaration of war. You will regret this. I stared at the 3 words on the screen. A chill went down my spine. But it was quickly replaced by a surge of defiance. Let her try. I had nothing left to lose. I had already burned my life to the ground. Whatever came next, I would face it. Aunt Margaret came into the room with a small suitcase. Ready? She asked gently. I nodded, took one last look around the quiet room, and stood up. I deleted Cynthia's message and then turned my phone off completely. I didn't want to hear from that world anymore. I have a cousin with a small cottage on Tybee Island, Aunt Margaret said as we walked to the car. It's quiet. Off-season now. No one will bother you there. You can stay as long as you need. An hour later, we were driving east, away from Savannah, toward the coast. The city and its ghosts grew smaller in the rearview mirror. The landscape changed, the old oaks giving way to salt marshes and the wide, open sky of the low country. I could smell the salt in the air. It smelled like cleansing. It smelled like a new beginning. I didn't know what my future held. I had no home, no fiancé, and I had probably destroyed the most important friendship of my life. The pain of it all was still there, a deep, heavy ache in my chest. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something else, too. A tiny, fragile glimmer of hope. I had faced the worst betrayal imaginable, and I had not broken. I had fought back. I had told the truth. Whatever came next, I would survive. I had survived today. I was a girl who had walked out of her own wedding, leaving the ruins of her life burning behind her, and I was finally, terrifyingly, free. The cottage on Tybee Island was exactly what my fractured soul needed. It was small and weathered by the salt air, painted a cheerful, peeling blue. It stood on stilts at the quiet north end of the beach, away from the tourists and the pier. From its wide, screened-in porch, I had an uninterrupted view of the Atlantic Ocean. For the first few days, the ocean was my only companion. I watched it relentlessly, mesmerized by the rhythm of the tides. The water would roll in, cleansing the sand, and then recede, pulling the debris back out to sea. It felt like a metaphor for what I needed to do with my own life. Aunt Margaret stayed with me for 2 days, stocking the small kitchen, making sure I was eating, and generally providing a silent, comforting presence. She didn't push me to talk. She just sat with me on the porch, reading her novels while I stared at the waves. When she left, she hugged me tightly. The world will still be there when you're ready for it, she said. Take all the time you need. And so I did. I walked for hours on the empty beach. the cold autumn wind whipping my hair across my face. I let the vastness of the sky and the sea swallow up my small human pain. The first week was a blur of grief. The full weight of my losses finally settled on me. I wept for the man I thought Liam was. I wept for the mother I thought Cynthia was. Most of all, I wept for Chloe. For the sisterhood I had shattered. The anger that had fueled me through the wedding day was gone. Burned out. Leaving behind a deep, hollow ache. I allowed myself to feel it all. I didn't run from the pain. I sat with it. I listened to it. And slowly, very slowly, I began to process it. I started to separate the real from the imaginary. The Liam I mourned was a fiction I had helped create. The real Liam was weak, deceitful, and cruel. The Cynthia I missed was a character she had played brilliantly for years. The real Cynthia was a predator. Acknowledging this didn't lessen the sting of betrayal, but it began to untangle the knots of confusion in my heart. After 2 weeks of self-imposed exile, I turned my phone back on. The initial flood of messages had slowed to a trickle. The digital world had moved on. But there were a few messages that mattered. One was a long, rambling email from my principal, expressing his support and telling me that my job as a history teacher would be waiting for me whenever I was ready to come back. His kindness was a small balm on my raw nerves. There were also several missed calls and a single voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then pressed play. A man's voice, quiet and hesitant, filled the silence. Hello. This is a message for Alara Hayes. My name is, well, it's not important. I was a friend of the Walker family. I was at the wedding. I wanted to say that I believe you. And I think you were incredibly brave. The message ended abruptly. There was no name. No number to call back. But it was a small crack of light in the darkness. Not everyone in my town thought I was a monster. Someone had seen the truth. The most difficult message to read was an email from Chloe's father, Cynthia's husband, a quiet man I had always liked. The email was short and formal. He informed me that he and Cynthia had separated, and he offered a sincere, heartfelt apology for the pain his family had caused me. He wished me peace and healing. There was no defense of his wife, no excuses, just a quiet acknowledgement of the damage done. His words brought a fresh wave of tears. But these were different. They were tears of validation. I wasn't crazy. The truth was the truth, even when it was ugly. I started to piece together the aftermath of the wedding from the cautious, supportive texts from a few close friends who had finally managed to get through to me. The story was exactly as Aunt Margaret had predicted. The town was a battlefield of gossip. Liam and Cynthia had initially tried to deny everything, painting me as a jilted, hysterical liar. They claimed I had made up the story out of jealousy over Cynthia's close, motherly bond with Liam. But their story fell apart quickly. Too many people knew me. They knew my character. They knew I wasn't cruel or unstable. The final blow to their narrative, I learned, came from Chloe. A week after the wedding, she had confronted her mother. No one knew the details of the conversation, but the result was that Chloe packed her bags and moved out, going to stay with her grandparents in another state. She had cut off all contact with both her mother and Liam. Chloe's flight was an admission of guilt that Cynthia couldn't deny. It was the ultimate corroboration of my story. With their daughter gone and her husband leaving, Cynthia and Liam were left isolated, their lies exposed to the harsh light of public opinion. They were no longer the victims of a crazy bride. They were social pariahs. Knowing this didn't bring me joy. There was no sweet taste of victory. It was all just sad. A whole network of lives, ruined by selfishness and deceit. My revenge had been swift and total, but the fallout was messy and painful for everyone. One afternoon, a month after I had arrived on the island, I was sitting on the porch when a car pulled into the sandy driveway. My heart leaped into my throat. For a wild second, I thought it might be Liam, or even Chloe, but it was Aunt Margaret, and she wasn't alone. Chloe got out of the passenger side. She looked thin, her face pale and drawn. The bubbly light that had always been in her eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. She stood awkwardly by the car, not looking at me. My own feet felt rooted to the porch floor. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had replayed 100 possible conversations with her in my mind, but now that she was here, my mind was a total blank. Aunt Margaret gave me a small, encouraging nod. She called me. She said quietly, "She wanted to see you." Then she turned and went inside the cottage, giving us space. Chloe finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine across the 20 feet of sand that separated us. It felt like a canyon. "Hey," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Hey," I replied, my own voice tight. She walked slowly toward the steps of the porch, her gaze fixed on the weathered wooden planks. She stopped at the bottom step, as if she didn't have the right to come any further. "I'm so sorry, Elara," she said, the words coming out in a rush, as if she had been holding them in for weeks. "For what I said to you at the church. I didn't want it to be true. It was easier to be angry at you than to believe." She trailed off, her throat closing up. "You don't have to apologize," I said. "And I meant it. I put you in an impossible position." "No." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "You told the truth. I just didn't want to hear it." She finally looked up at me again, and her eyes were filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "I went to your house." "Our house?" "The day after. He was there, packing his things. I asked him. I begged him to tell me you were lying. And he couldn't even look at me. He admitted it. He admitted everything." I closed my eyes, a fresh wave of pain washing over me for her. "And my mother," Chloe's voice broke completely. "She's not the person I thought she was. She's a stranger. She doesn't even think she did anything wrong. She told me I was being dramatic. She said you and I would have drifted apart after the wedding anyway." The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. "I'm so sorry, Chloe," I whispered again. "I came here to say I'm sorry," she repeated, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "And to ask if you can ever forgive me." I walked down the steps until I was standing right in front of her. I looked at the face of the girl who had been my other half for more than 2 decades. We had been through everything together, scraped knees, first heartbreaks, shared dreams. What had happened wasn't her fault. She was a victim, just as I was. "There's nothing to forgive," I said, and I pulled her into a hug. She collapsed against me, her body shaking with sobs. I held her tightly, my own tears finally falling, mingling with hers. It wasn't a hug that magically fixed everything. The trust between us had been damaged, and the scars of what her mother and Liam had done would always be there. But it was a beginning. It was a bridge across the canyon of pain. We stood there for a long time, 2 friends on a windswept beach, holding the broken pieces of our lives together. The healing had begun. Chloe stayed for the weekend. We didn't talk much more about what happened. The wounds were still too raw. Instead, we fell back into the easy, comfortable patterns of our lifelong friendship. We walked on the beach and collected seashells, just like we did when we were kids. We cooked a simple dinner together and watched a terrible romantic comedy on the small television, making fun of the predictable plot. It was fragile and tentative, but it was real. We were rebuilding, one small, normal moment at a time. When she left with Aunt Margaret on Sunday afternoon, there was a sense of peace between us that I hadn't thought possible. "I'm staying with my dad for a while," she told me as she stood by the car. "He and I are figuring things out. I think I'm going to take some classes at the community college there. Try something new." "That sounds wonderful," I said. And I meant it. She was finding her own path out of the wreckage. "Will you come back?" she asked, her voice quiet. "To Savannah?" I looked out at the ocean, at the endless horizon. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Not yet. But I'll call you. I promise." We hugged one last time, a hug of farewells and new beginnings. As I watched them drive away, I didn't feel the same crushing loneliness as before. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming a piece of my past, and it had given me the strength to start thinking about the future. I stayed at the cottage for another 2 months. Through the quiet, windswept days of early winter, I read books. I took up sketching. I learned the names of the coastal birds. I got a part-time job waitressing at a small, friendly diner on the south end of the island, enjoying the anonymity and the simple rhythm of the work. I was just Elara, the new girl who was a good tipper and always had a book with her. No one knew my story. No one looked at me with pity. For the first time, I felt like I was living a life that was entirely my own, not one that was defined by a man or the dream of a family. One crisp January morning, I was walking along the beach when my phone rang. It was my principal. "Elara," he said, his voice warm. "I hope I'm not bothering you. I was just calling to check in, and to let you know that we're starting to plan for the spring semester. I've held your position, but I need to know, are you thinking of coming back?" I stopped walking, the waves lapping at my bare feet. A few months ago, the thought of returning to Savannah would have filled me with dread. But now, something had shifted. The town wasn't a monster. It was just a place. A place where I had built a career I loved. A place where friends and a support system still existed. Running away forever felt like letting Liam and Cynthia win. Letting them chase me out of my own life? Yes, I said. The word surprising me with its certainty. Yes, Mr. Henderson. I'm coming back. Returning to Savannah was strange. The town looked the same. But I was different. I moved into a new apartment. A bright, airy studio in a part of town I'd never lived in before. It was small, but it was all mine. Aunt Margaret and a few loyal friends helped me move in, filling the empty space with laughter and secondhand furniture. The first day back at school was the hardest. I could feel the students' curious stares. I could hear the whispers in the hallways. But I held my head high. I walked into my classroom, filled with the familiar smell of chalk dust and old books, and I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't realized I'd missed so much. I was a history teacher. I knew better than anyone that the past, no matter how painful, is something you learn from, not something you run from. I threw myself into my work. My lessons became more passionate, more engaging. I taught my students about revolutions, about empires that fell, about people who rose from the ashes of their lives to build something new. In teaching them, I was teaching myself. I learned from friends that Liam had lost his coaching job in the wake of the scandal. No one wanted a man with his reputation mentoring their sons. He had moved away, to a different state, trying to escape his shame. I felt nothing when I heard the news. No satisfaction. No pity. He was simply a closed chapter in a book I was no longer reading. Cynthia remained in Savannah, a ghost in her own life. Her husband had finalized the divorce. She lived alone in the large house that had once been the center of our social world. People avoided her. She had become a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. I saw her once, from a distance, at the grocery store. She looked older, smaller. All her vibrant color faded to gray. Our eyes met for a second across the produce aisle. I saw that same cold hatred from the church. I simply turned and walked away. Her poison couldn't touch me anymore. Life settled into a new, quiet rhythm. My friendship with Chloe continued to heal, nurtured by long phone calls and occasional visits. We were different now, more cautious and more honest with each other. The innocent, girlish bond was gone, but in its place was a stronger, more resilient connection forged in the fires of a shared trauma. One Saturday afternoon in the spring, I was sitting in Forsyth Park, grading papers under the shade of a large oak tree. The air was sweet with the scent of azaleas. A dog chased a frisbee nearby. Children laughed on the playground. It was a perfectly ordinary, perfectly beautiful day. A man's voice interrupted my thoughts. "Excuse me. Is this seat taken?" I looked up. He was tall, with kind eyes and a friendly, slightly awkward smile. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. "No, it's free," I said. He sat on the other end of the bench, placing a book beside him. "You're Miss Hayes, right? The history teacher at Savannah High." I tensed slightly. "Yes, that's me." I thought so. He smiled again. "My nephew is in your class. He says you're the best teacher he's ever had." "Oh," I said, surprised and pleased. "That's very kind of him." We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment. Then he spoke again, his voice softer, more hesitant. "I was at your wedding," he said. My stomach dropped. I braced myself for the pity, the awkward questions. "I called you a while back," he continued, seeming to sense my discomfort. "I left a voicemail. I wanted to say it again. What you did was the bravest thing I've ever seen." And then I remembered. The voice on the phone. The one person who had reached out not with gossip, but with respect. I looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time. "Thank you," I said. And the words came from the bottom of my heart. I really needed to hear that. "My name is Ben," he said, extending his hand. I took it. His handshake was firm and warm. "Alara." We started talking. We talked about books, about teaching, about the ridiculousness of the tourists on the Segway tour that rolled past us. He was a landscape architect, and he talked about the city's parks and squares with a passion that matched my own for history. He didn't ask me about what happened. He didn't treat me like a fragile, broken thing. He treated me like a person. When the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, he stood up to leave. Well, Elara, he said, a hopeful glint in his eye. It was really nice to finally meet you properly. Maybe I could buy you a coffee sometime? So you can tell me if my nephew is actually doing his homework. I looked at his open, honest face. A year ago, I would have said no. I would have run from the very idea of letting someone new into my life. The risk would have been too great. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had walked through fire and survived. I had learned that my value didn't come from a relationship, and my happiness wasn't dependent on someone else's love. I was whole, all on my own. And because I was whole, I was no longer afraid. A real, genuine smile spread across my face, a smile that reached my eyes. I liked that very much. I said, I didn't know what would happen with Ben. Maybe it would be one coffee. Maybe it would be more. It didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time in a very long time, I was looking forward, not back. My story wasn't a tragedy. It was a story of survival, of rebirth. I had lost a fairy tale, but I had found myself, and that was a much better ending than I ever could have dreamed of.